Okay, so hello children. We have our topic which is the brain and behavior today. So as you can see the structure of brain on the very first slide. This is how the human brain looks like. Now moving on to our very first slide which is talking about the hindbrain. So the brain is divided into three parts: the hindbrain, the midbrain and the forebrain. Under the hindbrain you have the medulla oblongata, the pons and the cerebellum. So if you see the medulla oblongata, children, it is the lowest part of the brain and it exists in continuation of the spinal cord, and it has the neural centers, and these neural centers are basically helping in regulating the life supporting activities. And what are the life supporting activities? Breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, and that is why it's called the most vital part of the brain, the most vital center of the brain. And then we have the pons, children. The pons, basically, if you see, is connected with medulla on one side and is connected with the midbrain on the other side. And the nucleus, which is the neural center of the pons, it is receiving all the auditory signals which are being relayed by the ears. And the most important function of pons is that it is involved in sleep mechanisms, especially the sleep that's characterized by dreaming. And there is nuclei, you know, which is affecting the respiratory movement, and this nuclei is also affecting the facial expressions. When we talk about cerebellum, it's the most developed part of the hindbrain, highly developed, and we can recognize it through its wrinkled surface, and it maintains and controls the posture and the equilibrium of the body. Its main function is the coordination of muscular movements. So please note that its most vital function is the coordination of muscular movements. And children, the cerebellum is receiving and coordinating them, all the motor commands, you know, coordinating them to relay to the muscles. And the memory of movement patterns is also being stored by the cerebellum. So, all of your movement patterns, like how to walk, how to dance, how to ride a bicycle, all these important movements, children, they are already stored. You don't have to keep going back and trying to remember that, oh, how did I walk, how did I run, how I actually used to ride a bicycle. Even if you ride a bicycle after 10 years, 20 years, you would know how to ride a bicycle, right? It is because it is already stored in the cerebellum. The memory of movement patterns are all stored in the cerebellum, so you don't have to essentially concentrate each time to remember what's happening. And then next we have the midbrain. The midbrain, children, if you see, is smaller in size, and it is connecting the hindbrain and the forebrain. So the hindbrain and the forebrain are getting connected by the midbrain, which is somewhere in the center. And there are few neural centers, which are related to some special reflexes, and visual and auditory sensations are also found over here. So the most important part of the midbrain, children, which you have to remember, is the reticular activating system, and the short form of it is RAS. And what is the most important function of RAS? It is responsible for arousal. It is this particular system in the midbrain which makes us alert and active because it regulates the sensory inputs. And it is also helpful in selecting information from the environment. Then, when we talk about forebrain, children, we have, the hypothalamus, thalamus, the limbic system. These are the three most important parts. And then we also have the cerebrum, you know. But first, we start with hypothalamus. So, again, the keywords you can see here, physiological processes are being regulated. Now, what are the physiological processes? We have in terms of the emotional and the motivational behavior, like eating, drinking, sleeping, temperature regulation. All of that is being regulated by the hypothalamus. It is actually regulating and controlling the internal environment of the body as well. And what comes under the internal environment of our body? The heart rate is there, the blood pressure is there, the temperature is there, secretion of hormones. All of this is also being regulated by the hypothalamus. So if you remember the keywords, children, which I've mentioned here, you will never forget their functions. What's important is to always go back to the keywords so that you can further elaborate on the functions. Thalamus is a relay station. Why is it a relay station? Because it is receiving the incoming sensory signals from sense organs, and these incoming sensory signals are being sent to the appropriate parts of the cortex for processing purposes. And also it is receiving the outgoing motor signals which are coming from the cortex, and it sends them to the other parts of the body. So the to and fro of the information is being done by the thalamus. Then we have the limbic system. Limbic system, if you see, it is helping us in order to maintain the internal homeostasis by regulating the body temperature, the blood pressure, the blood sugar level, and also it has close links with these two important parts, hippocampus and amygdala. Hippocampus, children, plays a vital role in the long-term memory, and amygdala plays an important role in the emotional behavior. So you must remember, what are they associated with? For the long-term memory, it's hippocampus, and for the emotional behavior, it's amygdala. Moving on, we have the cerebrum. So cerebrum, the other name of it is cerebral cortex, and it is actually regulating the higher levels of all cognitive functions. So the cognitive functions which we've done in unit 1 also. We have attention, perception, learning, memory, language, behavior, reasoning, problem solving. So cerebrum is actually 2/3 of the total brain. The 2/3 part of the brain is the cerebrum, and it's actually covering the entire surface of the brain, and it contains the neurons, neural nets, bundles of axons, you know. So when we talk about cerebrum, children, it's divided into two symmetrical halves. We have the cerebral hemispheres. These symmetrical halves are called the cerebral hemispheres. Now you must know what is each hemisphere doing, how does it respond. So the left hemisphere is controlling the language behavior. The right is dealing with images, spatial relations, and pattern recognition. And in between the two hemispheres, it's connected by a white bundle of myelinated fibers, and that bundle of myelinated fibers is called corpus callosum, and this corpus callosum is carrying the message back and forth between the hemispheres. Then the cerebral cortex, children, it has four lobes: frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. Frontal is mostly concerned with cognitive functions. The cognitive functions I've already mentioned before. And the parietal lobe is concerned with the cutaneous sensations and also its coordination with the visual and auditory sensations. Temporal is children concerned with processing of auditory information, you know, the memory for symbolic sounds, words, all of this resides in the temporal lobe. Even the understanding of speech and written language all comes down to the temporal lobe. It actually depends on the temporal lobe. The occipital lobe is children concerned with the visual information mainly, and the interpretation of visual images, memory for visual stimuli, color visual orientation, all is happening with regard to the occipital lobe. So occipital lobe is playing a major role when it comes to the anything that comes to vision, with the vision. So this was all about the various parts and behavior of brain. So thank you so much, children.